Hello, my name is Shinay Trudeau, and I'm here again with Bhavani Maki for another episode of the Yogi's Roadmap podcast. These are conversations from the heart, and your attention is the most precious commodity. We thank you so much for choosing to listen in with us today. Bhavani, what a joy and a gift it is to be with you.
I am so grateful to be with you too. Thank you for these wonderful, real conversations.
You're welcome. My favorite kind. So I've been thinking a lot about yoga as a shedding process, or as you often say, a letting go process, or an undoing rather than the effort to do. That sounds nice in theory. And yet there's also some fear involved when I really practice what that means. So talk to me about having the courage to go into the unfamiliar, perhaps even the unsafe, the uncomfortable, and the unknown.
Well, it's so interesting because as you were saying, undoing and unknown, I was like onion. And
Yes.
we talk about that. That's a familiar metaphor. But then I don't remember where I heard it or I saw it or was chopping an onion up and how it grows from the inside, right? So it's this peeling back and this shedding. Um, I think like a lot of times we're afraid of giving up parts of ourselves, but really it's about seeing that we have so many layers to us. And as we're willing to go into that, it's a practice of intimacy. Um, and so, all those layers and all those parts are true, but not in isolation, right? It's like the whole onion is there, and there's roots, and there's the core, and there's the bulb. And so that's just what happens, it's like that what Patanjali says, it's like the seeing power is what is a manifestation of consciousness. And like we're seeing all of these layers, and all of these layers form what we know as our personality. And the personality in itself isn't a problem unless we kind of get stuck in a certain layer. And sometimes when you cut an onion, there'll be a layer like a few in from the surface that's a little bit brown and dehydrated, right? And so, like, you can see where there isn't a true transmission of the juice. When we can also understand the nature of the organ of the brain, and we can think of it as like being this um this soft this soft and impressionable kind of a surface or a context. What they call in Greek um the edifice, right? Like it's the face or the surface. um that there are ingrained patterns. They're the stories that have been told about us. Behind those stories there's the deeper truth. There's kind of like the sense of propriety that's inherited. A lot of it's cultural, a lot of it's familial. A lot of it is actually we're a product of our environment. I think I've shared that before, and looking at like my heritage, that's Northern European, and then the Mediterranean heritage. It's like we're a product of our environment. And so in the North, people are much more um, conservative in their expressiveness and with their words because energy really had to be stored. Where in the Mediterranean, there was just kind of like this lavishness and this effusiveness. So it's like they say, I think in the Vipassana tradition, that as you're sitting for these agonizing long psychotic break and revelatory experiences, and no one's helping, and you're not even allowed to use mantras or pranayama. I'm like, hell no, of course I'm out, right? But no, it's a beautiful practice. And that really, those thoughts actually are just thinking themselves. So as soon as we're really attaching to those, and then we go into the story of, rather than like realizing that this is just part of that folklore that's been threaded, and it's a story that still isn't fully told, is it? Right? It's like that's the Tantra, how we use those storylines, and then the story that we weave into it, and then we're going to pass the baton to the next generation, and we will all be forgotten. We're all destined to be forgotten. That it's only when we, instead of kind of unwinding it, to realize that like these are the many threads of creation that are woven through the fabric of life and time and space and causality, that there's a deeper underlying kind of a nexus. So something that I've been really reflecting on recently, and of course, just by having that revelation of like, oh my God, I've been missing the point. And there's kind of this sense of like embarrassment, of a little bit of guilt, like, oh my God, I thought I was doing it, etc. Was this aspect of vairagya, of really being able to see through those colors, through those layers, and in just having acceptance. We don't have to get hooked in the same way. And because if we get hooked, or we're suppressing it, the nature of the shadow is that it's going to come out, as Carl Jung said, we call it fate. It's going to play out in the world. So when we can like, embrace our humanity and withdraw our projections, and also realize, okay, there was something right about it. It doesn't mean it's going to be right in the future, but I'm going to own my part in that. And in owning it, I can also bring it into the light of my being and let it go, and not feel that shame, and not feel stuck there. So, it is a practice, right? And it takes a long time of getting used to. And Patanjali even addresses it, that there's like this fear that if we let go of these unique characteristics, that we're going to be kind of like this homogenous, like milk toast without any butter on it, without any honey on it, that it's just going to be like dry. And but that's not the truth, actually, because, and this is this week's sutra in the Kaivalyapada, in the mentorship, nirmana chittani asmita matra. When we have intimacy with those parts of ourself, we realize that they actually have a function. But rather than being a default system, we can show up in the way that's actually needed, with and even construct a different personality according to what is needed in the moment, without this sense of being inauthentic. Because there's a settledness in our own integrity. So we're growing, and I love, how Martin Prechtel speaks about that. It's like he goes on to say, it's not this. It's not about peeling back layers. I would like to say, and rather than not, it's about discovering that you have many, many different layers. And we can show up in a way that is authentic And also, again, with that inner security, we can kind of let go of that need to assert who we are and our authenticity and realize that we're part of a larger project. And that really reveals in the yoga room. I'm sure you've experienced that when somebody comes in, let's say you have an established sangata and people know how to be. And they come in and it's like you're coming into a sacred space. So there's like a demureness. There's a real beauty to the ritual of coming in with a softness in your being instead of like walking through the door or being really needy or whatnot. And oftentimes the novice will come into that space and they just don't know how to be because it's a new culture to them. And um, it can take a while for them to understand the decorum of the room, which is that, like, okay, it's okay if you struggle a little bit. It's okay if you don't know what you're doing. And if you have a real seasoned facilitator, and there's definitely different degrees of that. First, people just have to learn how to say, how to teach the poses, and they're doing it by rote. But someone who's really embodied it, they're going to come in and help you when you need it. And it's okay to not understand. And that's kind of that part of that being a seasoned practitioner. It's like, I understand that I'm only seeing certain layers. And of course, it makes me, like there's a sense of insecurity, maybe that I don't know, but really there's a sense of wonder underneath that. So, yeah, and it takes time to do that. Just think about the evolution of a child, right? Like the child, it's like they're just forming their sense of themselves. And yet the self comes in so fully formed that everything revolves around that child. And then they're full-blown narcissists, right? And we all come in that way. And then gradually if we have the attunement, and sometimes we don't, and then that's the psycho-spiritual work of like picking up the slack, because what is it that your teacher Lee Lazowick said, like um what is it, it's like our parents give us the wounds
Oh
that
yeah.
only God can heal,
Yeah.
right? And whether God, you think of it as God or um source or love, that's our journey. If we come in entitled, thinking that everybody should make us comfortable or that we have it harder than anybody else, we become a bottomless pit of neediness. So it's like, having that courage to loosen up. Maybe it isn't even shedding, and it's loosening up. So I love, like, as you know, I'm really deeply interested in functional movement and structural integration as innovated by Dr. Ida Rolf. And she speaks about how, like, you can see on bodies, right? We have all these different sheets and layers, and they're not just like nesting dolls or an onion. Some of them work through cross planes, and they're moving and they're morphing, and there's a viscosity to them that you can see where people have a superficial strength, that
Mhm.
there's an underlying weakness.
Mhm.
And so then she invites us to learn how to move from our core, in which movements become an extension of ourselves, in which we're actually using a larger gravitational field to to give us that strength. So, just learning how to stand and get your feet underneath you and lean into that, that gravity, she says, is God. It's one of the forms of God. There's a moving from inside, which is like an intrinsic strength. So, what we're really developing is that intrinsic strength. And the core, even, is, or what she calls the line, or what we could call to Sushumna, it's not even something that's totally clear. It's a felt experience. And it moves around.
Mm.
So you can only sense it when you're curious.
The courage to remain curious.
There you go. Up. Theme for the maybe. Let's keep
Maybe,
going.
let's keep
It's
going.
an onion.
But what it brings up for me is that it's almost as if, I mean, not the image that comes to mind is that I have to relax in order to experience all my layers. Is that when I'm so rigid, like you said, I only remain on the surface and I only remain in that fear of the unknown, or fear of whatever it is, kind of like the fear body is on the surface, and I have to, if I want to permeate all of those layers and all of that deep stuff, there is some kind of softening or relaxation or like, yeah.
And then I almost feel like, I know the spirit that you're coming from, but just for our listeners, rather than this becoming another thing to do, another layer we're putting on the onion, it's like it's the offering
Mm,
that we make. I want to relax.
yeah.
It feels good to relax. And we're always at that precipice of like, is it safe? But that's that process of intimacy where, you kind of realize how much of our psychic energy is depleted by holding on to these structures. So Patanjali calls it svarupa, and he also calls it sva artha in the fourth chapter, which is the pure form, which has a function. Form and function. Does form inform function? Does function inform form? Yes, both are true. So, it takes a lot. It's not something that happens in a minute, because if it did, it'd already be done and everybody would be doing it. But that's the way that we like feed the holy and the sacredness and that trust in the unknown, which is really more, rather than thinking of it as the unknown, maybe it's the unknowable,
Mm,
but something that is not separate from us. Again, it's a felt experience, which there's so many ways to feel things, right? We start somatically, but then we also realize that it's like, pratibha, this seasoned intuitive insight, or first we have to have common sense, and then we develop um, sensational
mm,
uh, capacities, which are known as superpowers and supernormal.
mm.
So I've shared this joke before, but it's worth mentioning again. Why did the woman keep banging her head against the wall? Do you remember this one?
No, why?
Because it felt so good when she stopped.
Oh
Right?
my
And it's like
God.
you just let it go and you're like, "Oh my God, wow."
Yeah.
So, even that, like our neuroses, which many people like, they hang on to them because they're unsure of like asking the question of who they are. And, that's not to point a finger, it's not a blame thing. It's like that is our journey. Even in the third sutra, Patanjali says your original self. He doesn't say anything about who you are. He's like, that's for you to discover. And what a wonderful adventure. Rama would speak about it, Rama Jati Vernon, when she would do her exhaling thing and she would say, and then you exhale, and then you exhale. And it was like, oh my God, when does you would feel yourself go like, I'm dying. But this is where the ego starts to release. And she said it's more a place of kind of like taking that deep dive, the psychonauts adventure, in which that new spaces are going to open, new edifices, new territories, new worlds are opening all the time. And that, it's like the image of Vishnu, where universes are being created and dissolving all the time, kind of like bubbles, right? They like expand and then they dissolve. And we can even see that, with the Hubble spacecraft all the time. Stars are collapsing, becoming red dwarfs, and then there's supernovas and black holes. So there is a greater continuity. And last week's sutra, it's like even our ideas of original self or an original cause, it's it's not about that. It's not about pointing the finger or nailing it down. It's realizing the cyclical nature of things, and that, these parts, like when you loosen up, these parts are always at your disposal and they will come in when they're needed.
Yeah.
Woo, I'm good because that
Yeah.
question made me
Yeah.
nervous. I was like,
That's
I don't
great.
know.
But
Okay.
yeah, I
This
think
is
it
a
was
moment to trust.
just trust. So talk to me more about how it's okay to not understand. I mean, I feel that a lot in my own life. Um, I've never, I can't say never, but I hardly ever been shamed for not knowing. There were teachers in school who were looking for a specific answer, and when I said something clearly not the right answer, um, I never, I didn't
According to
really,
them.
according to them. But that was in grade school, and then later on in college, there was really this relishing in all of the perspectives and in the not knowing. And I feel like there's so much space for that in the yoga classroom. And it's a new way for people to really be in the not knowing.
Yes, absolutely. And this is so great because it's next week's sutra too, which is that you know, we talk so much about, like quoting Jola Prade and how she beautifully articulated this, capacity for capacity. And I was reflecting that, like, um, as I shared in my own revelation of like, wow, have I really been taking that part of yoga, the abhyasa? Yeah, I've got the consistency and the study and the discipline and whatnot, but like then you almost get over full, right? It's like you have so much, so much, so much. And how much do you really need? Like how, it's like when you're hungry, 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 but like are you actually metabolizing? And that's not to say I'm not, but then there has to be an evacuation process as well. So expanding capacity for capacity is also about clearing space, right? Holding what we know loosely instead of hanging on to it. And Patanjali's very clear on that. He says, like, don't try to um like conform your life to ideas around yoga. That's not what yoga is for. It's not about like pointing the finger to the original cause. It's really about how you can improve quality of life, extract the nectar, and not only yours. I mean, that is primary, so even ideas of self abnegation or immolation, And what I see a lot and what I saw in myself too initially was like pushing, pushing, pushing. And like if it isn't hard, it isn't yoga. If I'm not like at the point of heat exhaustion and of the way yoga's taught now, of dehydration and of ultimate constriction, then it's not yoga, right? So it's like actually um our ability to let go of that sense that we have to become something that we're not, that like we're becoming our authentic self. How could you be anything else? Tat tvam asi. So that essence of vairagya, which is really, the seasoning, that's what we learn. Life teaches that in the end, is like being turned on and a new pathway opens, right? New connections are made. And it's not about the connection, it's about the path. That there's more choices, there's more dynamicism, there's more opportunities. So Vairagya is that clearing out. How can you have capacity, expanded capacity for capacity, if you're already so full and so loaded? So there's like a reciprocity in which like you take something in and like you're like, this is wonderful. And then you let it go. Maybe you pass it on or whatever. There's so many forms it can take. So really, what we're learning is a love of learning. And that, and so even like what in our lineage, and it came through Baba Haridas, came through Krishnamacharya, I teach to learn what I don't know. And even then we could reframe it. I teach to learn because I love learning. And let's even titrate it further down. Learning is the active form of love. So when we're in that loving state, when we're in that state of feeling our own fullness, which has space for what we don't know, what is yet to be discovered. I mean, I know in our family, and this is from my family tradition, on Christmas Day, we never opened all the gifts. And I remember sitting with Ray's family where it was just like this pile of gifts and you're just ripping paper and you look at something for 5 seconds and throw it to the side. And, in our family, you opened a gift a day until the gifts ran out. And then you had time to sit with that gift. So on Christmas Eve, we always opened the presents from our grandparents in Europe. And from Greece, there were pistachios and mastika, which is like this tree sap candy. And from my family in Finland, there were often like marimekko pajamas and, some like Finnish chocolate and always books, right? So we got like that. That was like the big kitty at the first night. And then the next day, we would each get a book. And then the next day, maybe we'd get a toy or, and
I
it was just
love
like,
that.
it was really great. I mean, otherwise, it's almost like people have a hangover. And same
Totally.
thing, by the way, with Thanksgiving. Oh my
Totally.
God,
Yeah.
people create all this food. They stuff it's like they've been cooking for days
Yeah.
and then they gorge and the
Yeah.
meal's over in like 20 minutes, an
Yeah.
hour. And
Yeah.
I love, even that sensibility. And of course, this is my cultural upbringing, maybe other people enjoy it, where each course, and it's not a huge course, but there's a krama to it. There's an order to it, and you enjoy each course. And then there's a moment of clearing the plates away and a moment for conversation, And there's really, it's about exploring the whole arc of it. And I kind of forgot your question, but
It was about the unknown. Yeah, it was good.
the unknown
Yeah.
and just, like, yeah, just like holding space for what's next? We don't know. And let's enjoy this moment and also feel that wonderful sense of anticipation of what's coming without just running to grab it. So there is that process of, like when we look at yoga shastras, it says we couldn't, we don't have the nodic structure or the nervous system to know it all. If we did, we would be shattered.
Mm,
And that story, like in the Mahabharata, or is it the Gita, which is
mm,
in the
mm.
Mahabharata, where Arjuna, is talking to Krishna and he says, "Come on, show me your cosmic self." And he goes, "Dude, you couldn't even handle. Like you couldn't handle." He says, "Give me a peek." And Krishna opens his mouth. And do you remember what Arjuna sees?
Everything.
Exactly. Universes being born and, solar systems and stars collapsing. Like it's all happening right here, right now. But that's a big step to step into the quantum field. So that's where I love, like, instead of just sitting and, dying 1,000 deaths and cooking, um, or even like, and this doesn't mean it's not a viable path, but it's a very, that left-handed path, like Dr. Svoboda talks about, where it's like, okay, go face fear, go into the crematorial grounds. You're going to pick a fresh corpse. You're going to sit on that corpse all night. You draw a circle around it. And then on top of it, build a little fire in the corpse's mouth and watch all of your ghouls and demons come out. And it's a very accelerated path, but most people die or go crazy, right? So that's where, the eight-limbed path really is, it's it's a very balanced and integratable path. And we're so lucky to have the sutra as just streamlined, to the point directions that fill in the gaps of all these other things that we've already kind of learned. It gives us a body. It
Mm.
gives us a body that appreciates our body, our incarnation, and that there is a process of going from seed to fruit and back to seed.
And I really appreciate that you touched on the timing of things and the length that it actually does take, and if I'm going to see it through, hopefully for the rest of my life, it's almost like I have to pace myself or I will burn out. And so that timing, like you described, I love that on Christmas and Thanksgiving of just taking our time with things, but even in the process of yoga to really understand that a practice means over a long period of time. That's kind of the assumed, you know, rest of the sentence when we say practice and just how useful that is to remember that it's going to take time.
And there's some wonderful story about that too, where it's like, maybe it's a Rumi story or one of those incredible mystics who are able to speak to our heart, the essence of this incredible adventure. It's like, why are you rushing so hard to get to your own death? Enjoy the phases, and there will be struggles there. And you need to go through those developmental phases instead of just rushing to the final phase. And I really see that a lot, in the yoga world, where there's a lack of really just giving yourself the time to learn and be a student instead of just rushing into the role of teaching. And you know that because you've come from a tradition. It's like, yeah, you could go and sit with a pundit and hear what they're saying and then, just basically repeat it by rote. But it's hollow and it's depleting until it's something, look, you can let it go. You're clinging to it because it's in your cells, right? So there is that maturation process. And so there's a lot of people who are half baked and then they throw themselves into the fire of teaching and they don't. And listen, it's not like you reach some kind of a benchmark where you're finally have the psycho spiritual maturity to do it, but there is a benchmark as far as like, okay, I have enough self awareness and I have enough security and enough integration where I can face these unknown moments. And also, I have a team, I have colleagues, I have mentors. They're not necessarily all in the field of what we know as hatha yoga, but like I have a team here and I have some seasoned knowledge. So, I even like in the business aspect of it, where people build too big and then it becomes top heavy and things start to wobble. So, that sense of vertical and horizontal growth.
Mm.
So, that's where, really it was like your teacher said, okay, now I want you to go out and teach, right? It's time, or the community starts pulling on you. And usually, like in a healthy sense of like self awareness, there's going to be some reticence because you know how big it is. But you can, with that sense of humility, which isn't a feigned humility or a self abnegation, it's like, okay, let me like pull in the assets that I have, let me pull in the team and and then there's even ways of working with the team where they're not in their body, like Patanjali, right? That is definitely an incredible asset. I know in my own trainings, it was like a revelation when I just started to allow the sutra to be a guiding line in the training, because it really meets you where you're at. And then it opens a new possibility that gets you curious. Whoa, I never even realized there was this whole other layer to the onion. That the onion isn't just what I can hold in my hand. There's so much more.
That's great that you brought that up. I'm really glad, um, because we need guides. We need teach. I mean, I'll speak for myself, but I would go so far as to say everybody does. But I need these, and that importance of studying with people who aren't necessarily, yeah, yes, Patanjali wrote the Yoga Sutra, but it's not like we practice today. It's very much more inclusive and like way more nuanced and rich, and to be able to really take these things on and study. Thank
And
you.
it's a different kind of learning environment. I mean,
Yeah.
circling back to what you were saying, like being a kid in school, and when the teacher wanted a particular answer according to their curriculum and their train of thought, right? And sure, there's value in that. But then, like for me, or for me and you, our relationship is so much bigger. You're a colleague, you're a friend, and this path can be very, very lonely in some ways, because when you're operating in this place in which you're really willing to like let go of your personality, and there's a real tenderness in which you offer yourself to someone, many people aren't really there yet to be able to relate to you on that level. So those relationships are incredibly rare and very, very special.
And needed. Needed.
Yeah,
I need them.
I do too,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And that takes a growing into, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's where people like maybe too quickly try to pull that out of someone who's a student, and like the container is broken, the crucible of like the function of what you're holding, and it depotentializes the experience. So it's something that just develops organically, um, because again, there's a sense of understanding, and there's a sense of decorum in which both people are being lifted up and seen in their gifts, and also appreciated that they have challenges too. Something that was really interesting, when we were sitting in the hot springs in Durango with Joe LaPrade, who, I just respect so much, her depth as a Jungian psychologist. And I was sharing, it's interesting when I finally like stopped, having to, because I was like forced into the role of teacher by my teacher. I mean, I was like pushed, or as like given a ladder, and then the ladder was kicked away. And so I really like had to adopt this personality. And then when it became cumbersome and I started to like loosen that up and show my humanity, I lost a lot of students. And I said that to her, and she said, yeah, because then they could no longer hold their projection on you as you being someone who they could give their power to. And
Wow.
that was a really interesting insight.
Mm. It seems like that happens. I mean, I can relate in certain friendships or, yeah, friendships, acquaintances, that I'm currently going through that, that they're dissolving, because I'm maybe because I'm becoming more me, or I don't know. I don't know why, but there's kind of a refusal on my part to for that projection to come. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and everything has its cycle and its phase, right?
Yeah.
I feel like, that's a part of us that think that like, oh, if I was really spiritual, these relationships would continue through a lifetime. And they actually do, they just change. So people are going to cycle in and out of our life. And I know, like, one of my dearest, oldest friends, Suzanne, who I wrote about her in my book, who, when I was like ordered to teach by my teacher, and I was like, holy shit, I need to go like really get some formal like teacher training. And I went to Mount Madonna to study under Baba Haridas. And she was like, that sounds really fun. I'd like to go. And she just went for fun. She didn't have like this, she hadn't been ordained to teach or anything. She just did it because she's really curious, and she's like that. She's amazing. She's always like doing life drawing and dancing and Zumba and whatever. Like, she's always just like, she's so dynamic and curious in that way. And we don't see each other for a year at a time. And yet there's just this real deep soul connection, and we don't have to be on top of each other. And it's okay. And then there's always this feeling when I'm with her, like, oh, I should hang out with her more. And it's like, no, it's okay. We don't even have to, because there's this quintessential, like our quintessence connects with each other. It's like we have this I don't know even how to put it. Like we're maybe cut from the same pattern and we're different cloth, or we're cut from the same cloth and we have a different pattern, but like we get each other on such a deep level that we don't have to be on top of each other. There's a lot of space in the relationship. And isn't that the mark of like a seasoned relationship? You
Yeah.
kind of come into, we talked about this last week, like the difference between obsession and love.
Yeah.
And you come into a relationship and there is this sense of obsession. And of course, it's a lot of projections, but also you're recognizing something in that person.
Yeah.
And then with time, there's enough comfortability. Like for me, a really comfortable relationship is where we can just be with each other and we don't even have to say anything.
I was just thinking that. It's like back to that trusting in the unknown, but it's almost like in the unsaid. You don't need to be on top of each other, but trusting the space and the container and the space in between. Yeah.
I mean, I really love that. Like it used to drive me nuts about my husband because he's super quiet. And, we fell madly in love. And then I remember we were like making a drive to Kauai, which is the furthest point on the island. It's like an hour and 45 minutes. And I literally sat there in silence and timed how long it would take for him to say something to me. And I was so angry and so frustrated because I wanted more. I wanted more. And then, like, through the sutras, I realized that, like, he was communicating with me, but he wasn't using words. And he's a very subtle being. And in our family, we all really, I mean, fortunately, we're all cut from that same cloth where we are together in separate spaces.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to say? We didn't get to my other two questions, but I'll save those for next time. But
Are we
anything,
already done?
we're done. I'm not even gonna touch these other ones because
Oh my gosh, that
yeah,
went so fast. I
yeah,
can't even believe it.
yeah,
Um, you know, um, no, there's nothing to say.
yeah. That was great. Thank you so much, Bhavani.
Thank you so much, Shanae. I love you.
I love
And
you.
yeah, you're such a joy to be with.
Thank you.
Thank you.